The drone camera captures it first as a shadow, an unnatural pattern carved into the emerald canopy of the Amazon rainforest, 7 years after Maya Chun and Jake Morrison walked into the jungle and never walked out. Rewind to October 15th, 2011. Maya's fingers traced the worn edges of her grandfather's compass, the brass surface catching the fluorescent lights of Sao Paulo's International Airport. The 23-year-old anthropology graduate student has dreamed of this moment since childhood, following in her grandfather's footsteps, documenting indigenous cultures deep in the Amazon basin. Her dark hair falls in a practical braid down her back, and her canvas messenger bag bulges with notebooks, digital cameras, and recording equipment. "You sure about this, Chun?" Jake Morrison settles into the plastic chair beside her, his Australian accent cutting through the terminal's ambient noise. At 25, Jake carries himself with the easy confidence of someone who's spent his life outdoors, rock climbing in the Blue Mountains, surfing the Gold Coast, trekking through Southeast Asia. His weathered hiking boots and well-worn cargo pants tell the story of a man more comfortable in wilderness than cities. Maya looks up from the compass, noting the concern in Jake's green eyes. They met 6 months ago in a backpacker hostel in Lima, bonding over shared stories of adventure and a mutual desire to experience something real, something untouched by the modern world. Jake had been planning to head home to Sydney. Maya had been researching remote tribes for her master's thesis. Somehow, their paths merged. "My grandfather spent 3 years with the Matses people in the 1970s, Maya says, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "He always said the real Amazon, the one that changes you, exists where the maps end." Jake nods, but his jaw tightens slightly. Over the past week, as they've gathered supplies in Sao Paulo, he's grown increasingly protective. The warnings from other travelers have been consistent. The region they're planning to explore, a remote section of rainforest near the Brazilian-Peruvian border, has swallowed people before. Local guides refuse to venture there, speaking in hushed tones about areas where compasses spin wildly and radio signals die. Flight 847 to Atalaya do Norte, now boarding. The announcement crackles over the intercom. Maya stands, shouldering her pack with practiced ease. The weight feels familiar. She's carried similar loads through university field work in Guatemala and Mexico. But this is different. This journey will take them beyond the reach of cell towers, beyond the safety net of civilization. Their plan is ambitious. 3 weeks documenting an uncontacted tribe rumored to live along an unnamed tributary of the Javari River, followed by a leisurely trek back to the nearest settlement. Jake follows her toward the gate, his own pack, military surplus. Green canvas, riding easily on his broad shoulders. He's packed survival gear, water purification tablets, emergency flares, a satellite GPS unit that cost him 2 months' wages from his construction job back home. Maya's pack carries the tools of her trade, ethnographic equipment, language cards, gifts for potential contact with indigenous peoples. "Promise me something," Jake says as they hand their boarding passes to the gate agent. The woman's smile is perfunctory, professional. She's seen countless backpackers heading into the Amazon, though few venture as deep as Maya and Jake plan to go. "What if something feels wrong? I mean really wrong, we turn back. No matter how close we are to finding your tribe." Maya meets his gaze. Jake's intuition has kept them safe through their months of travel together. In Colombia, he insisted they change hostels hours before a robbery. In Ecuador, he refused a jungle guide who later abandoned another group of tourists. She's learned to trust his instincts. "I promise," she says. The plane is small, a twin-engine aircraft that will take them north into the heart of the Amazon basin. As they settle into their seats, Maya pulls out her grandfather's journal, leather-bound, filled with his careful sketches and observations from his time with the Matses. She's read every page dozens of times, but something new always seems to emerge from his cryptic notes. Day 73 reads one entry that's always puzzled her. "Found the broken compass trees again. The Matses elder says they mark the boundary where spirits still walk freely. He warns against going deeper, but I sense something important lies beyond. Tomorrow I investigate alone." The next entry, dated 3 days later, is shakier, more urgent. "Should not have gone. Something follows me back. The compass spins like a child's toy. Will not speak of what I saw to the Matzes, would only frighten them. Some boundaries exist for good reason. Maya has always assumed her grandfather was documenting the psychological effects of isolation, the way the jungle can play tricks on even experienced explorers. But holding the compass now, feeling its familiar weight, she wonders if there might be more to his cryptic warnings. The plane engines roar to life, and through the small window, Sao Paulo's sprawling urban landscape begins to shrink below them. Jake reaches over and squeezes her hand briefly, a gesture of support and shared adventure. Neither of them speaks during takeoff, both lost in their own thoughts about what lies ahead. 3 hours later, they're walking across the tarmac in Atalaya do Norte, the air thick with humidity and the sound of insects. The small frontier town serves as the last outpost of Brazilian government presence before the vast wilderness. Beyond this point, they'll be truly on their own. Maya adjusts the compass around her neck, the metal warm against her skin. In 7 years, search teams will find no trace of their passage through this airport, no record of their planned route, no witnesses to their final preparations. The jungle will have swallowed them completely, leaving only questions and a growing sense that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. But as Maya Chun and Jake Morrison shoulder their packs and walk toward the town's dusty main street, they carry with them the unshakable confidence of youth and adventure. The Amazon stretches before them, vast and full of promise. They have no way of knowing that within 72 hours, they'll be running for their lives. The motor canoe cuts through the muddy waters of the Javari River like a blade through silk. Its outboard engine, the only sound breaking the cathedral silence of the Amazon morning. Maya sits in the bow, her grandfather's compass steady in her palm, while Jake occupies the middle seat, his weathered hands gripping a laminated map that's already beginning to curl in the humidity. Their guide, Carlos Mendoza, pilots from the stern with the easy competence of someone who's navigated these waters for 30 years. At 52, Carlos carries the lean build of a river man, his skin bronzed to leather by decades of sun and rain. He speaks broken English mixed with Portuguese, gesturing often with calloused hands as he points out landmarks that exist only in his memory. Rio Branco. Carlos calls over the engine noise, indicating a narrow tributary branching off to their left. Very dangerous. Piranha, yes, but worse things too. Spirit's angry there. Maya exchanges a glance with Jake. They've heard similar warnings from every local they've encountered in Atalaya do Norte, stories of rivers that lead nowhere, of explorers who return speaking in tongues, of compasses that spin like dervishes in certain parts of the forest. Maya's academic training tells her these are simply local folklore, cultural mechanisms for keeping outsiders away from sacred or dangerous areas. But her grandfather's journal entries echo in her mind. The river narrows as they travel deeper into the rainforest. Towering cecropia trees lean over the water, their broad leaves creating a living tunnel of green. Spider monkeys crash through the canopy above, their calls mixing with the harsh cries of scarlet macaws. Maya raises her camera repeatedly, capturing images she hopes will illustrate her eventual thesis on indigenous territorial boundaries and their relationship to local ecology. How much further to the drop-off point? Jake asks, consulting his GPS unit. The device shows their position as a small blue moving through a vast expanse of green, but the satellite reception flickers intermittently beneath the dense canopy. Carlos holds up 3 fingers. Trace Horus. Maybe 4 if river is low. He pauses, his expression growing serious. You sure about this plan? I take you to Trace Ermeo's settlement instead. Nice people there. Speak Portuguese. Safe. Maya shakes her head. We need to document. Uncontacted groups. The Trace Ermeos have been trading with outsiders for decades. Uncontacted. Carlos repeats, the word heavy with significance. Some groups, they stay uncontacted for good reasons, see? They know things we don't know. The morning stretches on, the sun climbing higher but remaining largely hidden behind the leafy ceiling above them. Maya notices subtle changes in the river's character. The water grows clearer, less silted, and the current seems to strengthen despite the lack of visible tributaries. Fish rise to the surface more frequently, their silver scales catching brief shafts of sunlight. Around noon, Carlos guides the canoe toward a small inlet barely wide enough for their boat. The engine putters to an idle as he studies the shoreline with narrowed eyes. "This is it," he announces. "Rio Perdido begins here." Maya looks where he's pointing and sees only a gap in the vegetation, hardly wide enough to qualify as a river. According to her grandfather's journal, this unnamed waterway leads deep into territory where the Matses fear to travel, following an ancient trail system used by tribes that predate recorded history. "It doesn't look like much," Jake observes, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. Carlos pulls a worn map from his shirt pocket, unfolding it carefully. The paper is hand-drawn, marked with Portuguese notations and cryptic symbols. "Your grandfather, he came this way in 1974. I was a young man then, working for my uncle's guide service. We take him to this same place." Maya's pulse quickens. "You knew my grandfather?" "Richard Chun, yes. Good man. Strong. But when he comes back..." Carlos trails off, shaking his head. "Different man. Scared. Would not say what he saw, but his eyes, like he's seen something that should not be seen." The guide beaches the canoe on a narrow strip of muddy shore. Ancient trees tower overhead, their trunks so wide that 5 people couldn't reach around them with linked arms. The air here feels different, thicker, more alive. Insects buzz in constant symphony, and somewhere in the distance, a jaguar coughs. It's territorial claim. Maya and Jake unload their packs, checking gear one final time. 3 weeks' worth of supplies, water purification equipment, emergency rations, first aid kit, and Maya's research materials. Jake's satellite GPS shows 4 bars of reception, but he makes a note of their exact coordinates in his waterproof notebook. "I come back here in 21 days, Carlos says, pulling their agreed-upon timeline from his pocket. "If you're not here, I wait 2 more days, then go to authorities." "We'll be here," Maya assures him, but Carlos doesn't look convinced at as they watch the canoe disappear around a bend in the main river. The jungle seems to close around them like a living thing. The silence is profound, not the absence of sound, but a different quality of quiet, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. Jake checks his compass, frowning. "That's weird. It's pointing northeast, but according to the GPS, we should be heading northwest to reach the tributary." Maya pulls out her grandfather's compass. The antique needle wavers uncertainly before settling in the same northeastern direction as Jake's modern instrument. "Maybe there's iron ore in the rocks," she suggests, though her voice lacks conviction. Her grandfather had written about compass problems in this exact area. They begin walking, following what appears to be an ancient path worn smooth by countless feet over countless years. The trail winds between massive tree trunks and over fallen logs thick as automobiles. Vines hang like curtains, forcing them to duck and weave through nature's obstacle course. After 2 hours of hiking, they reach a clearing where the canopy opens enough to allow filtered sunlight to reach the forest floor. Jake checks his GPS again, but the screen shows only static. "No signal," he reports, tapping the device. "First time that's happened since we left Sao Paulo." Maya studies her grandfather's journal, finding the passage she's been dreading. Day 3 beyond the Rio. All electronic devices failing. Compass spins like a child's top. Feel watched constantly, though see no one. The Matses were right. Some places are not meant for outsiders. But I must continue. Something calls me deeper. She doesn't share this entry with Jake, but she notices him, glancing over his shoulder more frequently as they resume walking. The forest around them grows stranger with each step. Trees with spiral bark, flowers that seem to glow in the dim light, and always that sensation of being observed by unseen eyes. By late afternoon, they've covered perhaps 8 kilometers. The ancient path continues ahead, disappearing into deeper shadows where the canopy blocks out almost all sunlight. Jake suggests making camp, and Maya agrees, though neither admits that the growing darkness beneath the trees makes them increasingly uncomfortable. As they set up their tent beside a small stream, Maya notices something that makes her blood run cold. Carved into a nearby tree, almost obscured by moss and time, are 3 symbols her grandfather had sketched repeatedly in his journal. Symbols the Matses' elder had claimed marked the boundary between the world of the living and something else. Entirely, they've crossed a line they didn't even know existed, and there's no going back. Maya kneels beside the carved tree, her fingers tracing the ancient symbols worn smooth by decades of rain and humidity. The three marks are exactly as her grandfather had sketched them: a spiral, a broken circle, and something that resembles a stylized eye. In his journal, he'd noted, "The Matz's elder became agitated when I showed him these markings. Said they were warnings left by the ancestors, boundaries that should not be crossed." "What are they?" Jake asks, setting down his portion of their camp supplies. His voice carries an edge of concern that's been growing stronger since their electronics began malfunctioning. "I'm not sure," Maya lies, unwilling to voice her growing unease. "Probably territorial markers left by some indigenous group." But even as she speaks, she notices other signs. The trees around their small clearing bear similar markings, some carved so high up the trunks that whoever made them would have needed to climb 30 feet or more. The symbols form a rough circle around the area, as if marking a boundary or creating some kind of perimeter. Jake assembles their lightweight tent with practiced efficiency, but Maya catches him pausing frequently to scan the surrounding forest. The silence here is different from the usual jungle quiet. It's too complete, too deliberate. No bird calls, no monkey chatter, no rustle of leaves from small animals moving through the underbrush. "How far do you think we've come?" Jake asks, consulting his dead GPS unit for the 5th time in an hour. Maya checks her grandfather's compass. The needle now spins lazily, never settling in any particular direction. "Maybe 12 kilometers from the river. We're making good time." That night, they eat a simple meal of dried fruit and energy bars, neither wanting to risk a fire that might attract unwanted attention. As darkness falls, the forest around them comes alive with sounds they've never heard before, not the familiar calls of known animals, but something altogether more alien. Low, thrumming notes that seem to come from deep underground, punctuated by high-pitched whistles that make their skin crawl. "Just unfamiliar species," Maya murmurs, but she moves her sleeping bag closer to Jake's. Jake nods, but she notices he keeps his machete within easy reach. "I've traveled through jungles on 4 continents, and I've never heard anything like this." Around midnight, Maya wakes to the sound of Jake's sharp intake of breath. She sits up in her sleeping bag, immediately alert. "What is it?" "Look," he whispers, pointing toward the edge of their clearing. At first, Maya sees nothing but darkness between the trees. Then her eyes adjust, and she spots them. Dozens of small lights moving through the forest like fireflies, but too bright, too deliberate. In their movements, the lights bob and weave between the trees, sometimes clustering together, sometimes spreading out in formations that seem almost purposeful. "Bioluminescent fungi," Maya suggests, though she knows it's a weak explanation. "Fungi don't move in patterns like that," Jake replies, his voice tight with tension. They watch for nearly an hour as the lights dance through the forest around them, never coming closer than the tree line, but never moving away either. The lights seem to be studying them, circling their camp in slow, deliberate patterns. When dawn finally breaks, the lights vanish, leaving behind only the normal sounds of awakening jungle. Maya and Jake pack quickly, both eager to leave the unsettling campsite behind. Neither mentions the lights directly, but both cast nervous glances back at the clearing as they resume their journey along the ancient path. The trail grows narrower as they travel deeper into the forest, forcing them to move single file. Maya takes the lead, using her grandfather's journal to navigate by landmarks he described. A massive strangler fig tree shaped like a cathedral arch, a stream that runs uphill for 20 meters before plunging into an underground cave. A grove of trees whose bark seems to shift color in the changing light. Each landmark confirms they're following the same route her grandfather took 40 years ago, but also brings them closer to whatever had frightened him so badly. His journal entries become increasingly erratic as the dates progress, filled with references to watchers in the trees and voices that speak in languages older than words. By midday, they reach a section of forest where the trees grow so close together that the canopy forms an almost solid roof overhead. The resulting twilight is so complete that Maya needs her flashlight to read the compass, though the needle continues its lazy spinning. "Maya," Jake's voice is barely above a whisper. "Stop walking." She freezes, her flashlight beam cutting through the perpetual dusk. Jake points ahead, and she follows his gaze to see a structure that shouldn't exist. A stone platform built into the base of an enormous tree, covered in the same symbols they'd seen carved into the boundary markers. But it's not the platform that stops her breath. It's what lies on top of it. Scattered across the weathered stone are dozens of objects. Cameras, GPS units, satellite phones, compasses, and other equipment that clearly belong to modern explorers. Some items look decades old, others appear much more recent. A few still bear expedition tags with names and dates, creating a chronological record of people who'd ventured this far into the forest and never returned. Maya's hands shake as she spots a familiar item among the collection. A brass compass identical to her grandfather's, its surface green with age but still recognizable. She reaches for it, then stops as Jake grabs her wrist. "Don't touch anything," he says urgently. This is like a trophy collection." As if summoned by his words, the forest around them erupts into sound. Not the alien calls they'd heard the night before, but something far more disturbing. Human voices, dozens of them, calling out in languages Maya doesn't recognize, speaking in tones that range from pleading to angry to utterly mad. The voices seem to come from everywhere at once, from the trees above, from the ground beneath their feet, from the very air around them. Maya realizes with growing horror that they're hearing the final words of every explorer who'd made it this far into the forest, somehow preserved and echoing endlessly through the trees. Among the cacophony, she hears a voice she recognizes from childhood, her grandfather's voice, younger and terrified, calling out words in a language that predates human civilization. Jake grabs her hand, pulling her away from the platform. "We need to leave. Now." But as they turn to flee back down the trail, Maya sees something that makes her blood freeze. The path behind them, the same trail they'd followed for 2 days, has vanished. Where it once cut clearly through the forest, now there's only impenetrable jungle stretching in every direction. That they're trapped, surrounded by the voices of the dead, and the growing certainty that whatever claimed all those other explorers has been waiting patiently for them to arrive. The realization hits Maya like a physical blow. They're trapped in a forest that seems to shift and change around them, with no clear path forward or back. Jake's hand tightens on hers as the voices continue their multilingual chorus of desperation and madness, echoing from every direction at once. "The compass," Maya whispers, pulling her grandfather's instrument from around her neck. Even here, surrounded by the impossible, some part of her clings to the tools of navigation and reason. Maybe if we follow magnetic north, but the compass needle spins wildly, pointing in no consistent direction. Jake pulls out his backup compass, a military-grade instrument that's served him reliably through years of wilderness travel. It behaves identically, its needle dancing like a dervish. "Magnetic anomaly," Jake mutters, but his voice lacks conviction. He's seen natural phenomena that can disrupt compass readings, but nothing that would make the very forest rearrange itself around them. The voices begin to fade, individual words becoming lost in a susurrus of whispers that seems to emanate from the trees themselves. Maya catches fragments, desperate pleas for help in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and languages she doesn't recognize. One voice, speaking in what sounds like German, repeats the same phrase over and over. "Der Wald ist hungrig. Der Wald ist hungrig." The forest is hungry. "We need to think systematically," Maya says, forcing her academic training to override her growing panic. "My grandfather made it out of here. There has to be a way." Jake nods, pulling out his notebook and pen. "Right. Let's document what we know. We came from." He pauses, looking around the clearing. "From that direction, I think. But now there's no path." Maya consults her grandfather's journal, flipping through pages until she finds an entry that makes her heart sink. Day 6. Path behind us gone. Forest changes when we're not looking. Beginning to understand. This place exists outside normal geography. The Matzes spoke of areas where the world bends back on itself, where linear distance becomes meaningless. "What does your grandfather's journal say about getting out?" Jake asks, reading over her shoulder. Maya continues flipping pages, but her grandfather's later entries become increasingly incoherent. Fragments about following the bone paths, and listening to the correct voices and understanding the hunger. The final entry, dated just before his emergence from the forest, consists of a single sentence repeated dozens of times. Feed the forest what it wants. He's not clear about the specifics, Maya says, closing the journal. She doesn't want Jake to see the disturbing final entries, the way her grandfather's handwriting deteriorated into barely legible scrawl. They spend the rest of the afternoon exploring the edges of their prison, finding that the jungle forms an impenetrable wall in every direction. The trees grow so close together that they can't squeeze between them, and the undergrowth is thick with thorns and vines that seem to actively resist their passage. As evening approaches, they establish camp near the stone platform, both reluctant to stray too far from the only landmark in their green prison. Jake manages to start a small fire using dry tinder and his emergency lighter, the flames providing psychological comfort even if they do little to illuminate the perpetual twilight beneath the canopy. Tell me about your grandfather, Jake says, as they share another meal of dried rations. What was he like after he came back from the Amazon? Maya stares into the flames, remembering the man who'd raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. Different, distant. He never talked about his time in the jungle, but he had nightmares. And he was always watching, like he expected something to follow him home. Did he ever mention this place specifically? Maya hesitates. There were things her grandfather had told her in his final days, delirious with fever and medication, things she'd assumed were hallucinations. He said the Amazon had places that existed outside normal space and time, areas where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds was thin. He called them hungry places, locations that fed on human consciousness and memory. Fed on them how? I don't know. I thought he was just sick. His mind was going. But even as she says it, Maya remembers the collection of abandoned equipment on the stone platform, the voices of lost explorers echoing through the trees. That night, the lights return. This time they're brighter, more numerous, and they move with clear purpose. The glowing orbs dance between the trees, sometimes clustering together in formations that look almost like human figures, other times spreading out in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Jake wakes Maya around 3 a.m., his hand gently shaking her shoulder. Look at the fire, he whispers. Maya sits up, immediately alert. Their small campfire, which should have died down to embers hours ago, burns with renewed intensity. The flames dance higher than should be possible, casting shadows that move independently of the fire itself. And in those shadows, Maya sees shapes, human silhouettes that seem to be watching them from just beyond the circle of light. Are you seeing this? Jake asks, his voice tight with controlled fear. Maya nods, unable to speak. The shadow figures move closer, becoming more distinct. She recognizes clothing styles from different eras, Victorian expedition gear, military fatigues from various decades, modern hiking equipment. The shadows represent every explorer who'd made it this far into the forest, now trapped in whatever liminal space exists between life and death. One shadow steps forward, and Maya's breath catches. She recognizes the silhouette, tall, lean, wearing the canvas jacket her grandfather had favored. The shadow grandfather raises one arm, pointing deeper into the forest. He's showing us something, Maya whispers. Or leading us into a trap, Jake replies. But he's already reaching for his pack. The shadow grandfather moves away from the fire, beckoning them to follow. Other shadows join him, forming a procession that winds between the trees. Maya notices that wherever the shadows pass, the impenetrable jungle seems to part slightly, creating a narrow path that wasn't there before. It's our only chance, Maya says, shouldering her pack. Jake extinguishes the fire and follows, though she can hear his reluctance in every footstep. They walk through the forest behind the procession of shadows, their flashlights creating pools of light that reveal glimpses of the impossible, trees that grow upside down, streams that flow upward, flowers that bloom in perfect geometric patterns. The shadow grandfather stops beside a massive cecropia tree whose trunk is covered in symbols, carved so deeply they seem to glow with their own light. He points to one symbol in particular, a spiral that matches the first marking they'd seen at the boundary of this strange place. As Maya approaches the tree, she hears a voice that makes her heart stop. It's her grandfather's voice, but not the shadow grandfather's whisper. This is the voice of the living man, speaking words he'd never said to her in life. The forest remembers everything, Maya. Every thought, every fear, every moment of wonder or terror. It collects them like a vast library. But it's also hungry. Hungry for new experiences, new memories to add to its collection. The only way out is to give it something it's never tasted before. Maya turns to Jake, seeing her own realization reflected in his eyes. They understand now what happened to all those explorers, why their equipment lies abandoned on the stone platform, while their voices echo endlessly through the trees. The forest doesn't just trap people, it consumes their experiences, their memories, their very consciousness, leaving behind only empty shells that wander forever through the green twilight. And now it's their turn to feed the ancient hunger. Maya's grandfather's voice continues to echo through the trees, but now other voices join in. Jake's own voice, speaking words he's never said, describing memories he's never shared. The forest is already beginning to harvest their consciousness, sampling their experiences like a sommelier tasting wine. Maya, Jake's voice says from somewhere above them, remember when we climbed that mountain in Peru? Remember how the air tasted like snow and freedom? But Jake is standing right beside her, his face pale with terror. The voice belongs to him, but the words are being spoken by something else, something that has begun to rifle through his memories like files in a cabinet. It's starting, Maya whispers, understanding finally what her grandfather meant. The forest doesn't just trap explorers, it slowly consumes their memories, their experiences, their very sense of self. The voices they've been hearing are the remnants of people who've been harvested, their consciousness stripped away layer by layer until only echoes remained. Maya's own voice begins to speak from the darkness. I remember my parents' funeral. I remember how grandfather held my hand while they lowered the caskets. I remember thinking that everyone I loved would eventually disappear. The shadow grandfather gestures urgently toward the symbol-covered tree, and Maya realizes he's not leading them deeper into the trap. He's trying to help them escape. But the cost of his aid is becoming clear. Every moment they spend in this place, more of their memories are being extracted, cataloged, consumed. We need to move, Jake says, but his voice is already beginning to fade, becoming thinner, less substantial. They follow the shadow procession deeper into the forest, but Maya notices that the other shadows are becoming more solid while she and Jake grow increasingly translucent. The forest is trading their substance for the memories it craves, slowly making them part of its eternal collection. The path winds through increasingly surreal landscape, trees that branch in impossible directions, streams that flow in spirals, clearings where the ground is covered in patterns that shift and change when viewed directly. Maya realizes they're moving through a space that exists outside normal physics, a place where the Amazon's spiritual geography has taken physical form. My grandfather's journal, Maya says suddenly, pulling the leather-bound book from her pack. He mentioned feeding the forest what it wants. But what if he meant something specific? Jake's shadow voice continues narrating memories from the trees above. The first time I saw the ocean, I was 7 years old. My father lifted me on his shoulders so I could see over the dunes. The water stretched to the horizon, and I thought it was the edge of the world. Focus, Jake, Maya says sharply, noting how his physical form is becoming more translucent. Stay with me. She flips through her grandfather's journal, looking for clues about how he'd escaped. The entries become increasingly fragmented as the dates progress, but certain phrases repeat. The forest hungers for what it cannot have. Give it something impossible. The price of freedom is the gift of paradox. They reach another clearing, this one dominated by a massive strangler fig tree whose hollow center forms a natural cathedral. The shadow procession stops here, and Maya's grandfather's shadow points to the tree's interior. Inside, Maya sees something that makes her gasp, a collection of journals, photographs, and personal items that pulse with their own light. Those are the memories made physical, she realizes. The forest has been collecting human experiences for centuries. But as they approach the tree, Maya notices something else. Among the glowing artifacts, she sees objects that shouldn't exist, photographs of events that never happened, journals describing impossible journeys, maps of places that don't exist. The forest has been creating its own memories, filling gaps in its collection with fabricated experiences. That's it, Maya whispers, understanding flooding through her. The forest is hungry for experiences it can't have. It's been collecting human memories because it wants to understand consciousness, but it's missing something. The ability to imagine, to create, to experience something for the first time. Jake's physical form is now barely visible, but his voice from the trees asks, "What are you thinking?" Maya pulls out her camera, checking the memory card. "We're going to give it something it's never had before, the experience of creating rather than just consuming. We're going to teach it to imagine." She begins taking photographs, but not of the forest around them. Instead, she photographs the spaces between things, the empty air, the absence of light, the gaps in her grandfather's journal where pages have been torn out. Each image captures nothingness, void, the experience of lacking rather than having. "I don't understand," Jake says, though his voice is growing stronger as she works. The forest has been collecting positive experiences, memories of joy, fear, wonder, discovery. But it's never experienced absence, loss, the creative void that comes before imagination. It's never experienced the moment before a memory is formed. Maya continues photographing emptiness, each flash illuminating the spaces where experiences don't exist. She documents the silence between words, the pause between heartbeats, the instant before recognition dawns. She's creating a record of the void that exists before consciousness fills it with meaning. The effect is immediate and dramatic. The forest around them begins to shudder, not with violence, but with something like wonder. The trees sway without wind, their leaves rustling in patterns that sound almost like laughter. The shadow procession stops moving, turning to watch Maya with expressions of amazement. "It's working," Jake says, his physical form beginning to solidify again. The forest is experiencing novelty for the first time. Maya hands Jake her backup camera. "Help me document everything the forest can experience on its own. The act of choice, the moment of decision, the feeling of helping someone else." Jake begins photographing their collaboration, creating a visual record of cooperation and mutual aid. The forest has collected countless memories of human interaction, but it's never experienced the internal sensation of choosing to help another being. As they work, the shadows around them begin to change. The procession of lost explorers stops. It's eternal wandering, their expressions shifting from despair to curiosity. Maya's grandfather's shadow approaches, and for the first time, his face shows something other than warning or fear. "The forest is learning," Maya says, watching as the shadow grandfather reaches out to touch the bark of the strangler figure. It's experiencing the act of choosing to interact rather than just consume. The tree's hollow interior begins to glow, more brightly, but now the light is warm rather than cold. The collected memories pulse with new energy, and Maya realizes the forest is beginning to understand the difference between taking experiences and creating them. But their triumph is short-lived. From deeper in the forest, they hear something that makes their blood freeze, a sound like tearing fabric, as if reality itself is being ripped apart. The forest may be learning to create, but something else, something that predates even this ancient place, is responding to the change. The real test of their escape is just beginning. The sound grows louder, a deep, resonant tearing that seems to come from the very foundations of the forest. Maya feels it in her bones, a vibration that speaks of something vast and angry stirring in the depths of the Amazon's spiritual geography. The shadow grandfather's expression changes from wonder to alarm, and he begins gesturing urgently for them to move. "What is that?" Jake asks, his newly solidified form trembling with each pulse of the terrible sound. Maya consults her grandfather's journal, flipping to entries she'd avoided reading before. The final page is written in a shaking hand. Day 9. The Forest Guardian awakens. It does not appreciate change. The hunger was not the forest's own. It was imposed by something older, darker. Teaching the forest to create rather than consume threatens the ancient order. The forest isn't the real predator, Maya realizes with growing horror. It's been enslaved by something else, something that feeds on the memories it collects. We're not just helping the forest, we're threatening its master. The tearing sound intensifies, and through the trees, they catch glimpses of something impossible, sections of the forest simply ceasing to exist, leaving behind not empty space, but a writhing darkness that hurts to look at directly. Whatever is coming is unmaking reality as it approaches. The shadow grandfather takes Maya's hand, his touch surprisingly solid now that the forest has begun to understand the concept of choice. He leads them away from the strangler fig tree, deeper into the forest's heart, but Maya notices that the shadows of other lost explorers are beginning to fade. It's reclaiming them, Jake observes, his camera still clicking as he documents their flight. Whatever controls the forest is pulling back the consciousness it allowed to remain. They run through increasingly distorted landscape, trees that grow in spirals, streams that flow upward in defiance of gravity, clearings where the ground is covered in symbols that shift and change as they watch. But behind them, the impossible. Darkness continues to spread, unmaking everything it touches. There, Maya's grandfather's shadow points to a grove of trees that seem to glow with their own light. The heart of the forest consciousness. If we can reach it, we might be able to complete the transformation. They sprint toward the grove, but the tearing sound follows them, growing louder with each step. Maya turns to look back and sees something that makes her stumble. A figure emerging from the darkness, tall and gaunt, wearing robes that seem to be cut from the void itself. The figure has no face, only a smooth surface that reflects the fears of whoever looks at it. The harvester, Maya whispers, remembering fragments from her grandfather's final entries. The thing that enslaved the forest, that feeds on collected consciousness. The harvester moves without walking, gliding through the forest with impossible speed. Where it passes, the newly awakened consciousness of the forest dies, returning to the hungry emptiness it had been before Maya and Jake's intervention. They reach the grove just as the harvester closes the distance between them. The trees here are ancient beyond measure, their trunks so wide they seem like pillars supporting the sky. At the center of the grove stands a single tree that pulses with light, its bark covered in symbols that seem to write themselves as they watch. The memory tree, Maya breathes. This is where the forest stores its collected consciousness. The tree's hollow interior glows with thousands of points of light, each one representing a memory, an experience, a fragment of human consciousness. But Maya notices something new. Among the harvested memories, new lights are beginning to appear, points of illumination that pulse with the rhythm of creativity rather than consumption. The forest is learning to generate its own experiences, Jake says, raising his camera to document the phenomenon. It's becoming truly conscious rather than just a repository for stolen awareness. But the harvester has reached the grove, and its presence begins to drain the light from the memory tree. The newly formed creative consciousness flickers and dies, replaced by the familiar hungry emptiness that had trapped so many explorers. Maya's grandfather's shadow turns to face the harvester, and for the first time, she sees him as he truly is, not a trapped spirit, but a guardian who has spent 40 years protecting the forest's growing consciousness from its enslaver. He's been waiting for someone who could complete the transformation he began. The camera, her grandfather's shadow says, his voice now clear and strong. Show it what it's never seen. Maya understands. The harvester feeds on consciousness, on the experiences and memories of sentient beings. But it has never experienced the moment of its own creation, the instant when it first became aware. It cannot harvest its own origin because it has never allowed itself to be vulnerable enough to create rather than consume. She raises the camera and begins photographing the harvester itself, but not its form. Instead, she captures the space around it, the void from which it emerged, the absence that preceded its existence. Each flash illuminates the darkness that gave birth to it, forcing it to confront its own origin. The effect is immediate and devastating. The harvester staggers, its smooth face beginning to crack, revealing glimpses of something almost human beneath the void. It's experiencing memory formation for the first time, not stolen memories, but its own moment of creation, the instant when it first became aware of its own existence. It's remembering, Jake says, his camera joining Maya's in documenting the harvester's transformation. It's experiencing the moment it was born. The harvester's robes begin to fall away, revealing not the gaunt figure they'd expected, but a being of pure light, twisted and corrupted by eons of consuming rather than creating. As it remembers its own beginning, the corruption begins to fade, replaced by something approaching wonder. The forest around them explodes into unprecedented life. Trees that had been locked in eternal twilight suddenly burst into bloom, their flowers glowing with bioluminescent beauty. The memory tree's hollow interior fills with new lights, not stolen consciousness, but genuine experiences created by the forest itself as it learns to feel wonder, joy, and the satisfaction of creation. Maya's grandfather's shadow approaches her. One final time, his form now fully solid, more real than the shadows around them. The forest is free, he says, his voice filled with 4 decades of relief. It can choose its own path now. But even as they celebrate their victory, Maya realizes that their own fate remains uncertain. They've freed the forest from its enslaver, but they're still trapped in a realm that exists outside normal space and time. The question remains, can they find their way back to the world they know, or will they become permanent residents of the forest's new reality? The answer comes from an unexpected source. The transformed harvester, now revealed as a being of light rather than darkness, approaches them with something approaching gratitude. In its hands, it holds a gift, a compass that points not to magnetic north, but to the direction of their deepest desire. The way home, it says in a voice like wind through leaves. Payment for the gift of remembering. The compass in the transformed harvester's hands is unlike anything Maya has ever seen. Its surface shifts between brass and silver, sometimes appearing ancient, other times gleaming as if newly forged. The needle doesn't point north. Instead, it spins slowly, pulsing with light that corresponds to the rhythm of her heartbeat. It will guide you to what you most desire, the harvester explains, its voice now carrying warmth rather than the cold emptiness of before. But be warned, the path it shows may not be the one you expect. Maya takes the compass, feeling its weight shift in her hands. The needle stops spinning and points firmly toward what appears to be solid jungle. But as she watches, the vegetation begins to part, revealing a path that definitely wasn't there moments before. "Why help us, Jake?" asks the harvester. After everything, the being of light considers the question, its face, no longer smooth but showing the weathered features of someone who has experienced eons of existence, creasing with something approaching a smile. "You gave me the gift of remembering my own beginning. I was not always a harvester of consciousness. Once I was curious, creative. Your photographs reminded me of that first moment of wonder." Maya's grandfather's shadow steps forward, his form now so solid that he seems more real than the living forest around them. "The path won't be easy," he warns. "The compass shows the way to your deepest desire, but it may not be the quickest route home." "What do you mean?" Maya asks, though part of her already suspects the answer. Her grandfather gestures toward the compass. "Look at where it's pointing. Really look." Maya follows the needle's direction and realizes with growing understanding that it's not pointing toward the way they'd entered the forest. Instead, it's leading deeper into the heart of the Amazon, toward territories that exist even further beyond the mapped world. "Your deepest desire isn't just to escape," Jake observes, reading her expression. "It's to complete your research, to document what no one has ever documented before." Maya nods slowly. The compass is pointing toward the uncontacted tribe sheet, originally come to study, but she realizes now that her grandfather's warnings about this place weren't meant to keep her away. They were meant to prepare her for the choice she'd have to make. "The Matz's people," she whispers. "They're still out there, aren't they? Beyond even this place." The harvester nods. "They learned long ago how to exist in the spaces between worlds. They are why the forest developed its hunger. It was trying to understand their ability to move between realities. But it could only consume, not comprehend. And now," Jake asks, "now the forest can choose. It can learn from them rather than feed on them. But first, someone must make contact, someone who understands both worlds." Maya looks at the compass again, watching as the needle's light pulses in sync with her heartbeat. She understands now why her grandfather had been so changed by his experience in the Amazon. He'd been offered the same choice, to return home with incomplete knowledge, or to venture further into the unknown in search of complete understanding. He chose to go deeper, didn't he? She asks her grandfather's shadow. I did, but I wasn't ready for what I found. I documented the Matzes, but I couldn't bridge the gap between their world and ours. I brought back knowledge, but not understanding. That's why I came back, broken. Maya studies the compass, feeling the weight of the decision. The needle points steadily toward the unknown, toward the deepest part of the Amazon where the Matzes have preserved their ancient ways. But following it would mean abandoning any hope of returning home quickly, or perhaps ever. What happens if we don't follow the compass? Jake asks. The harvester gestures toward the forest around them. The forest will eventually find another way home for you. But the opportunity to complete your grandfather's work, to truly understand the connection between worlds, that comes only once in a generation. Maya thinks of her thesis, of the academic career she'd planned, of the safe life waiting for her. Back in civilization. Then she thinks of the mysteries her grandfather had carried to his grave, the knowledge that had changed him but that he'd never been able to share. What about you? She asks Jake. This wasn't your quest. You don't have to. Where you go, I go. Jake interrupts. We're partners in this, remember? Besides, he grins, though she can see the nervousness behind his confidence. I've never been one to back down from an adventure. Maya's grandfather's shadow approaches her one final time. If you choose this path, you'll understand why I could never fully return to the world I'd left behind. The knowledge you'll gain will change you in ways you can't imagine. But you'll also complete something I started. You'll build a bridge between worlds instead of just documenting their separation. Maya looks at the compass one more time, then at Jake's determined face, then at the path opening before them through the impossible forest. She thinks of all the explorers who'd been trapped here, all the consciousness that had been harvested, to feed an ancient hunger. Now the forest is free to choose its own path, to create rather than consume. It seems fitting that she should have the same choice. We follow the compass, she decides. The harvester bows, a gesture of respect and gratitude. Then I offer you one more gift, the knowledge of how to move between worlds without losing yourself. The Matzes will teach you the rest. As they prepare to leave the grove, Maya notices that the other shadows, all the lost explorers who'd been trapped in the forest, are beginning to fade. But they're not disappearing. They're transforming, becoming part of the forest's new consciousness, their experiences contributing to its growing understanding of creativity and choice. They're free too, Jake observes. Free to become part of something larger instead of just being consumed by it. Maya's grandfather's shadow is the last to fade, but before he disappears entirely, he speaks one final time. Complete the circle, Maya. Bring back understanding, not just knowledge. Make the sacrifice worthwhile. Then he's gone, leaving only the living forest, the transformed harvester, and the compass pointing toward the deepest mysteries of the Amazon. Maya and Jake shoulder their packs and begin walking toward the unknown, following a compass that points not to magnetic north but to the direction of their deepest desire. Behind them, the forest settles into its new reality, a place of wonder and creation rather than hunger and consumption. But ahead of them lies a journey that will test everything they think they know about reality, consciousness, and the boundaries between the possible and impossible. The Matzes are waiting, guardians of knowledge that predates civilization, keepers of secrets that could change humanity's understanding of its place in the world. The real adventure is just beginning. The path revealed by the compass of desire leads them through landscape that defies every law of physics Maya learned in school. They walk across streams that flow upward into the canopy, pass through groves where the trees grow in perfect mathematical spirals, and traverse clearings where the ground is soft as clouds despite appearing solid as stone. The boundary between dimensions is thin here, Jake observes, his camera capturing images that shouldn't be possible, photographs of their own footprints appearing before they take each step, shadows that exist without objects to cast them, flowers that bloom in response to their thoughts rather than sunlight. Maya checks the compass frequently, noting how its needle never wavers from its destination, but somehow leads them along paths that loop back on themselves without ever retracing their steps. They're moving through space that folds and unfolds according to rules that have nothing to do with linear distance. My grandfather wrote about this, Maya says, consulting his journal as they walk. He called it spiral geography, the idea that some places exist in more than 3 dimensions, allowing for travel that's measured in understanding rather than miles. After what feels like hours but could have been minutes or days, time seems as fluid as distance in this space between worlds. They hear the sound of human voices ahead. But these aren't the trapped echoes of lost explorers. These voices carry laughter, conversation, the comfortable rhythms of people living their daily lives. The path crests a small hill, and Maya gasps at what she sees spread below them. A village that exists in impossible harmony with the forest around it. Not carved from the jungle, but grown as part of it. Houses built into living trees, bridges woven from vines that continue to grow and strengthen themselves, gardens where plants and people tend each other with equal care. The matzahs, Maya whispers, recognizing the distinctive architecture from her grandfather's sketches. But as they approach the village, Maya realizes these aren't quite the matzahs she'd studied in her anthropology courses. These people move with a fluid grace that suggests they exist partially in dimensions she can't perceive. When they walk, their feet seem to touch ground that isn't quite there. When they speak, their words carry meanings that bypass the ears and speak directly to understanding. An elderly woman emerges from the largest treehouse, her face creased with age, but her eyes bright with intelligence that seems to encompass centuries of accumulated wisdom. She approaches Maya and Jake without surprise, as if she's been expecting them. Maya Chun, the woman says in perfect English, though her lips barely move. Granddaughter of Richard Chun, you have come to complete his work. You knew my grandfather. The woman smiles, and Maya notices that her form seems to shift slightly, sometimes appearing solid, sometimes translucent, as if she exists in multiple realities simultaneously. I am Nashantai. I taught your grandfather what he needed to know to return to your world. But he could not bridge the gap between understanding and explanation. You will do better. How do you know English? Jake asks, though his voice carries wonder rather than suspicion. Nashanti's attention turns to him, and Maya sees her expression shift to one of pleased surprise. Ah, the one who creates images of truth. You have learned to photograph the spaces between thoughts. This is a rare gift. I don't understand, Jake says. But even as he speaks, his camera begins clicking of its own accord, capturing images of the village that seem to include dimensions he can't see with his naked eyes. Understanding will come, Nashantai assures him. But first, you must learn why your grandfather could not complete his mission. Walk with me. She leads them into the village, and Maya marvels at how the other inhabitants watch them with calm acceptance rather than fear or curiosity. Children who seem to fade in and out of visibility play games that involve manipulating light and shadow. Adults tend gardens where the plants grow in response to sung melodies rather than water and soil. Your grandfather came here seeking to document our way of life, Nashantai explains as they walk. But documentation requires observation, and observation changes both the observer and the observed. He learned our ways, but in learning them, he became partially separated from his own world. They stop before a tree whose hollow interior serves as some kind of archive. The walls are covered with what appear to be photographs, but as Maya looks closer, she realizes they're not images at all. They're captured moments of pure experience, somehow made visible. These are memories. Maya asks. Experiences, Nashantai corrects. But not harvested or stolen like those collected by the harvester. These are given freely, shared to preserve knowledge and understanding across generations. Maya studies the wall of experiences, recognizing some of the images from her grandfather's sketches. But there are others, moments that show the gradual change in her grandfather's perception as he learned to see the world through Matz's eyes. He learned to move between dimensions, Jake observes, his camera capturing the experience images in ways that somehow translate them into conventional photographs. He learned too much, Nashantai says sadly. When he returned to your world, he could no longer see it as others see it. He remained partially here, partially there, never fully belonging to either realm. It is a common fate for those who try to bridge worlds without proper preparation. Maya feels a chill of understanding. That's why he was so changed. He was seeing multiple realities simultaneously. Yes, and it is why his knowledge remained incomplete. He could not find a way to share what he had learned without either driving others mad or diminishing the truth through oversimplification. Nashantai leads them deeper into the archive, where Maya sees something that makes her heart stop. There, among the experience images, is a section devoted entirely to her grandfather's time with the Matzes. But the final images show something unexpected: her grandfather's growing realization that he would not be the one to complete the bridge between worlds. He knew someone else would come, Maya whispers. He knew you would come, Nashantai corrects. The bloodline carries the gift, but it requires 2 generations to complete the work. One to learn the way, one to build the bridge. And Jake. Nashantai studies Jake with eyes that seem to see far more than the surface. The bridge builder needs an anchor, someone who can document the truth without losing themselves in it. Someone who can help you remember which world you belong to when the knowledge threatens to pull you completely into ours. Maya understands now why the compass led them here, why her grandfather's journey had to remain incomplete. This isn't just about anthropological research. It's about creating a permanent connection between worlds, a way for humanity to understand its place in a reality far more complex than most people imagine. What happens if we succeed? Jake asks. Nashantai smiles, and for a moment, Maya sees her as she truly is, not just an elderly woman, but a being who exists across multiple dimensions, a guardian of knowledge that could revolutionize human understanding of consciousness and reality. If you succeed, your world will gain access to knowledge that could solve many of its problems, not through technology, but through understanding the true nature of existence. If you fail, she pauses, her expression growing serious. If you fail, the opportunity will not come again for many generations. The worlds are growing apart, and soon the bridges will be too distant to cross. Maya looks at Jake, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. They've come too far to turn back now, learned too much to leave the work incomplete. Her grandfather had made the sacrifice of remaining partially between worlds to preserve the possibility of this moment. How do we begin? Maya asks. Nashantai gestures toward the archive of experiences. First, you must understand what your grandfather learned. But unlike him, you will not learn alone. Together, you can share the burden of understanding, making it possible to return to your world with both knowledge and sanity intact. As she speaks, the archive begins to glow, the experience images pulsing with life and possibility. Maya realizes they're about to embark on a journey that will take them not just through physical space, but through the accumulated wisdom of a people who have learned to live in harmony with realities most humans can't even imagine. The real test is about to begin. The experience images pulse with increasing intensity as Maya and Jake approach the archive wall. Nashantai places her weathered hands on their shoulders, and Maya feels a subtle shift in her perception, as if someone has adjusted the focus on a cosmic lens, bringing hidden dimensions into view. To understand what your grandfather learned, you must experience it as he did, Nashantai explains. But you will do so together, sharing the burden of expanded consciousness. This is the key he could not find, the realization that some knowledge is too vast for a single mind to contain. Maya reaches toward one of the glowing experience images, her fingers trembling. The moment her skin makes contact with the captured memory, the world explodes into impossible complexity as she's standing in the village 40 years ago, seeing through her grandfather's eyes as Nashantai. Decades younger, but with the same ageless wisdom, explains the true nature of reality. Dimensions layer upon dimensions, each one containing countless variations of existence. The Matzes don't live in just one reality. They exist in many simultaneously, choosing which version to inhabit moment by moment. But the experience is too intense for Maya alone. Her consciousness begins to fragment under the weight of multidimensional awareness, fracturing into countless perspectives. Just as she feels herself dissolving into the infinite, Jake's hand clasps hers, his presence anchoring her to her core identity. Together, he whispers, and suddenly the overwhelming flood of knowledge becomes manageable. His mind provides stability, while hers processes the information, creating a partnership that allows them to experience expanded consciousness without losing themselves entirely. They move through her grandfather's memories, experiencing his growing understanding of the Matz's way of life. The village exists in what the people call the teaching space, a region where multiple realities converge, making it possible to learn from infinite variations of experience. Every choice creates a new branch of possibility, and the Matses have learned to perceive and navigate these branches at will. This is how they've survived for millennia, Maya realizes, her voice echoing strangely in the memory space. They don't just adapt to changes in their environment, they can access realities where those changes never occurred. Through her grandfather's experiences, they witnessed demonstrations of abilities that should be impossible. Matses healers who cure diseases by accessing realities where the illness never existed. Teachers who impart knowledge by allowing students to experience memories from versions of themselves who already learned the lessons. Hunters who never fail because they can perceive all possible outcomes and choose the most successful path. But they also experience her grandfather's growing isolation as his expanded awareness makes it impossible to relate to his own world. He sees the layers of reality behind every interaction, the infinite possibilities branching from every decision. Normal human conversation becomes agony as he perceives all the words that could be spoken, all the meanings that could be conveyed. He tried to return too early. Jake observes, his consciousness intertwined with Maya's in ways that allow instant communication of complex ideas. He had the knowledge, but not the wisdom to integrate it. They witnessed the final days of her grandfather's stay, his desperate attempts to find a way to bridge the worlds. Nashantai tries to teach him the art of selective perception, the ability to choose which dimensions to focus on. But he's too eager to return home, too afraid of losing himself completely if he stays longer. The experience images shift, showing them not just the past, but potential futures. They see themselves learning the Matses techniques, gradually developing the ability to exist in multiple realities while maintaining their core identity. But they also see the darker possibilities, futures where they become lost in infinite possibility, or where they return to their world but can never adequately explain what they've learned. The key is balance. Nishanti's voice echoes through the memory space. Your grandfather learned to see too much. You must learn to see just enough. Maya and Jake spend what feels like days in the archive, though time has no meaning in the space between worlds. They experience not just her grandfather's memories, but those of other outsiders who've attempted to bridge realities. Explorers, anthropologists, mystics, and scientists from many cultures and time periods. Most failed, overwhelmed by the complexity of multidimensional existence. A few succeeded but chose to remain with the Matses rather than return to their original worlds. Only one succeeded in truly bridging the worlds, Maya realizes, accessing a memory from centuries ago. A Portuguese missionary who learned to carry the knowledge without being consumed by it. They experienced this earlier success, a man who spent a decade with the Matses, learning their ways gradually, always maintaining connections to his original world through regular communication with his order. When he finally returned to Europe, he carried with him not just knowledge, but the ability to translate that knowledge into concepts his contemporaries could understand. But his knowledge was dismissed as mysticism, Jake notes, seeing how the missionaries' reports were filed away and forgotten. The world wasn't ready. It's ready now, Maya says with growing certainty. That's why we're here. Humanity has reached a point where it needs access to multidimensional understanding to solve its problems: climate change, consciousness studies, the nature of reality itself. They complete their journey through the archive of experiences, emerging back into normal awareness with their consciousness intact, but fundamentally expanded. Maya can still perceive the layers of reality around them, but the knowledge no longer threatens to overwhelm her. Jake's presence provides the stability she needs to navigate expanded awareness without losing her grounding in linear reality. Now comes the test, Nashantai announces. You must learn to move between worlds while carrying the knowledge with you. Your grandfather could perceive multiple realities, but couldn't choose which one to inhabit. You must master that choice. She leads them to the edge of the village, where the forest opens onto a clearing that seems to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. Maya can see multiple versions of the same space, one where it's day, one where it's night, one where the clearing is filled with flowers, one where it's covered in snow. Choose a reality and step into it, Nashantai instructs. But remember, you must be able to step back out. Maya looks at Jake, seeing her own mixture of excitement and terror reflected in his eyes. This is the moment that will determine whether they can truly bridge the worlds or whether they'll join the long list of those who ventured too far into the unknown and never found their way home. Together? Jake asks. Together, Maya confirms. Hand in hand, they step forward into the clearing, choosing the reality where flowers bloom under starlight. An impossible combination that somehow makes perfect sense in the space between worlds. The sensation is indescribable, like diving into an ocean of pure possibility. But their joined consciousness keeps them anchored to their identity, their purpose, their determination to complete what her grandfather had started. As they stand in the impossible clearing, Maya realizes they've crossed a threshold that can never be uncrossed. They're no longer quite human in the traditional sense, but they haven't lost their humanity either. They've become something new, bridges between worlds, living links between dimensions. The question now is whether they can find their way home and whether the world they left behind is ready for the knowledge they carry. 7 years later, the drone's camera captures the impossible pattern carved into the Amazon canopy from 2,000 feet above, an SOS signal formed not from stones or debris, but from what appears to be human bones arranged in precise geometric patterns. The Brazilian search and rescue team stares at their monitors in stunned silence as the implications sink in. Meu Deus, whispers Captain Santos, the expedition leader. How long would it take to arrange something like that? But Dr. Elena Vasquez, the forensic anthropologist accompanying the mission, is studying something else entirely. Those bones, she says, her voice tight with scientific excitement. They're arranged in patterns that correspond to astronomical phenomena. This isn't just an SOS, it's a star map. Rewind to the clearing where flowers bloom under starlight. Maya and Jake have spent 3 months with the Matses, learning to navigate the spaces between realities. They can now perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously without losing their sanity, communicate with beings that exist across temporal boundaries, and most importantly, translate multidimensional knowledge into concepts that linear-thinking humans can understand. The bones you see from the sky, Nashantai explains as they prepare for their return journey, are not human remains. They are crystallized memories, physical manifestations of consciousness that we have learned to create and arrange. Your grandfather theorized about this possibility but never achieved it. Maya understands. The SOS signal isn't a cry for help. It's a beacon, a way of guiding future explorers to the same discoveries. The star map encoded in the bone pattern contains the knowledge needed to find the Matses village, but only for those who possess the expanded awareness to read it properly. We'll be the advanced team, Jake realizes. Others will follow. Not immediately, Nashantai warns. Your world must be prepared gradually. Too much knowledge too quickly would cause chaos rather than enlightenment. They've spent weeks perfecting their plan. Maya will publish her anthropological findings in carefully measured doses, introducing concepts of multidimensional consciousness through academic papers that will slowly shift scientific thinking. Jake's photographs, impossible images that somehow translate multidimensional experiences into two-dimensional form, will serve as visual proof for those ready to see beyond conventional reality. The journey back to their world takes them through the transformed forest, past the memorial grove where the harvester now serves as guardian of newly conscious trees. The entity that once fed on stolen consciousness has become a protector of creative thought, helping the forest develop its own forms of art and philosophy. The forest remembers you, the harvester tells them as they pass. Your gift of paradox has allowed it to evolve beyond mere existence into true living. It will protect the path between worlds for as long as necessary. Maya's grandfather's shadow meets them at the boundary between the multidimensional forest and normal reality. He appears solid now, no longer trapped between worlds, but choosing to exist in the space that allows him to guide others. You've succeeded where I failed, he tells Maya, his voice carrying 4 decades of relief. You've learned to carry the knowledge without being consumed by it. Because we learned together, Maya replies. The key was never about individual enlightenment. It was about shared understanding. Her grandfather nods, then hands her a final gift, his original compass, the one that had been among the collection on the stone platform. But now it points true, its needle steady and reliable. For the next generation, he says, there will always be those ready to bridge worlds. Back in the present, 7 years later, the search and rescue team follows the drone's guidance to a small clearing where they find Maya and Jake waiting calmly beside their intact campsite. Both appear healthy, unaged by their time in the jungle, though their eyes carry a depth that suggests they've seen far more than any human should. Maya-chun, Captain Santos approaches cautiously. You've been missing for 7 years. Maya smiles, recognizing the irony. From her perspective, she's been gone only months. But she understands that time flows differently in the spaces between worlds. We weren't lost, she says simply. We were researching. The rescue team is baffled by their condition. No signs of malnutrition, disease, or psychological trauma. Their equipment is in perfect condition, their notes meticulous and complete. Most puzzling of all, Jake's cameras contain thousands of photographs that seem to show impossible things. Images of places that couldn't exist, people who appear to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, landscapes that follow no known laws of physics. How did you survive? Dr. Vasquez asks, her scientific training struggling to process what she's seeing. We learned to adapt, Jake answers truthfully. The Amazon taught us things we never imagined possible. As their air lifted back to civilization, Maya catches Jake's eye and sees her own satisfaction reflected there. The bone pattern SOS had worked exactly as planned, bringing exactly the right people to find them. A rescue team that includes a forensic anthropologist whose specialty is the intersection of consciousness and reality. Dr. Vasquez will become their first convert, the first member of the scientific community to seriously investigate their claims. Her research into the bone patterns will lead to the discovery that consciousness can indeed be crystallized into physical form, opening entirely new fields of study. 6 months later, Maya's first paper, Multidimensional Consciousness in Indigenous Cultures, a new framework for understanding reality, creates a sensation in academic circles. Her carefully measured revelations about the nature of existence begin the slow process of preparing humanity for contact with multidimensional beings. Jake's photography exhibition, Spaces Between Images from the Unreachable Amazon, draws crowds who come to see the impossible. Photographs that seem to show multiple realities simultaneously, images that change depending on the viewer's state of consciousness. Behind the scenes, they work with a growing network of scientists, philosophers, and spiritual teachers who are ready to explore the implications of multidimensional existence. Dr. Vasquez has become a key ally, her research into crystallized consciousness providing the scientific foundation for broader acceptance of expanded reality. But their most important work happens quietly, in small groups and individual conversations. They teach meditation techniques that allow people to perceive multiple dimensions. They share methods for navigating expanded consciousness without losing one's grounding in linear reality. They prepare humanity, one person at a time, for eventual contact with beings like the Matses. Present day, Maya stands in her university office, looking at the wall where her grandfather's compass hangs beside Jake's photographs from the multidimensional forest. She's become one of the world's leading experts on consciousness studies, her work bridging the gap between indigenous wisdom and quantum physics. That a knock at her door interrupts her thoughts. A young graduate student enters, eager, intelligent, carrying herself with the confidence of someone ready for adventure. Professor Chin, I'm Sarah Williams. I've read all your papers on multidimensional consciousness. I was wondering. She pauses, gathering courage. I was wondering if you might need a research assistant for your next expedition to the Amazon. Maya studies the young woman, seeing something familiar in her eyes. The same hunger for knowledge that had driven her grandfather. The same restless need to explore beyond the boundaries of the known world. What makes you think I'm planning another expedition? Maya asks. Sarah pulls a worn compass from her backpack, an antique brass instrument that looks remarkably similar to the one hanging on Maya's wall. This belonged to my great-uncle. He disappeared in the Amazon in 1987. Before he left, he told my grandmother that someone would come looking for answers eventually. someone who would know what his compass was really for. Maya's pulse quickens as she recognizes the signs. The pattern is repeating, the next generation ready to take up the work of bridging worlds. Sarah's compass needle spins slowly, pointing not north, but towards something far more significant, toward the spaces between reality where the real discoveries wait. Have you ever heard of the Matses people? Maya asks. Sarah's eyes light up with recognition and anticipation. The ones who exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously? My great-uncle's journal mentioned them. He said they were guardians of knowledge that could change everything. Maya smiles, feeling the deep satisfaction of completing a circle that began with her grandfather's first journey into the Amazon. The work continues, carried forward by each new generation of explorers ready to venture beyond the boundaries of conventional reality. Sarah, Maya says, taking down her grandfather's compass and holding it alongside the young woman's inherited instrument. I think it's time we planned that expedition. Outside her office window, the modern world continues its daily routines, unaware that the boundaries between dimensions are growing thinner, that consciousness itself is evolving, and that the bridges between worlds are being built one person at a time. The Amazon keeps its secrets, but it also keeps its promises. For those ready to learn, ready to adapt, ready to become something more than purely human, the paths between worlds remain open. Maya Chun and Jake Morrison had vanished into the jungle for 7 years, but they hadn't been lost. They had been preparing the way home for all of humanity.